This podcast is free, and it's accessible to everyone thanks to support from listeners like you. If you value this show, please consider supporting its production by donating to our home, KUOW. It only takes a minute to give, and you'll be helping to support the production of this podcast. Make a donation at kuow.org or follow the link in the show notes. And thanks!
Tomo Nakayama is a singer and songwriter, most often found singing on stage to fans. But during the pandemic, the ability to play live shows and our ability to gather evaporated. Quarantined apart from his family, Tomo found himself filling his time like a lot of us did, by watching Netflix. He found comfort in watching episodes of Shinya Shokudo, or Midnight Diner, a TV series focused on a late-night diner in Tokyo that tells the stories of its customers and their colorful lives through focusing on the signature dish that they always order. These aren't sushi dishes, they're Japanese comfort foods, like chicken cheese katsu, yakisoba sandwiches, omurice, and tonjiru, a savory pork and miso soup. In fact, it's this miso-based dish that the master makes in the opening sequence of the show. At the end of each episode, the main character narrates how to make their favorite dish, while the master breaks down each step in a quick cooking demonstration.
And it got to the point where I had watched the whole series like 4 or 5 times. And it was so comforting. I knew the stories and what was going to happen. And so then a lot of those dishes I wanted to recreate at home, and I think that was kind of the impetus for my curiosity in cooking.
When the pandemic took away the concert stage, it pointed Tomo towards the kitchen, inspiring curiosity and discovery, and a new way of expressing himself. This is The Blue Suit, a podcast about the commonplace things that touch our lives and the uncommon people that transform them into something remarkable. I'm Shin-Yi Pai. Today, Miso.
I'm Alex Schwartz.
I'm Nomi Fry.
I'm Vincent Cunningham, and this is Critics at Large, a New Yorker podcast for the culturally curious.
Each week, we're going to talk about a big idea that's showing up across the cultural landscape, and we'll trace it through all the mediums we love. Books, movies, television, music, art.
And I always want to talk about celebrity gossip, too.
Of course.
We hope you'll join us for new episodes each Thursday. Follow Critics at Large today, wherever you get podcasts.
Hey, my name's Claire McGrain, and I'm a producer for Seattle Now, KUOW's local news podcast. There is a lot happening in our region, and it's a lot of work to keep track of it all. We'll get you caught up on the latest news and take a deep dive into something happening around the city, all in under 15 minutes. Get a morning walk-in or grab a cup of coffee and start your day with us. Learn something new and connect with our city by searching for Seattle Now wherever you get your podcasts.
Culturally specific foods have the ability to pull long-lost memories to the surface of the mind. Consider the aroma of the fresh-baked madeleine that once inspired a French novelist to write hundreds of pages about a search for lost time. Then there are the flavors that speak to the essence of a culture and its cuisine. Take miso paste. As a seasoning, it's been fermented. It doesn't need to be combined with a dozen other ingredients or flavors. Its basic nature is complex enough on its own, so much so that it's foundational to the Japanese diet.
It reminds me of home, just like every Japanese household, I think, wakes up to the smell of miso soup in the morning.
Miso is a basic ingredient in Japanese cooking made of soybeans that have been ground and fermented. It comes in red, brown, and white varieties, which all vary in complexity, age, and taste.
People who are really into it, they can tell what part of the country it's from by the flavor, or they'll identify really strongly with it. That's their like childhood flavor. And so everybody claims that theirs is the best.
This specificity of taste is something Tomo remembers from a trip to visit his family in Kochi, the region in southern Japan where he was born.
My cousin's wife said that when she first married into the family's rice didn't taste right to her because she came from the mountains, and the family that she married into, they lived by the ocean. So like just from being so close to the salt water, there's just like a slight amount of salt in the flavor of the rice, which like I wouldn't be able to tell, you know, but like she said, yeah, it took me years to get used to that flavor.
So subtle.
Yeah, it's so subtle. And in Japan, they call it kodawari. It's just, it shows care for each ingredient and like where it comes from and how it was grown.
Tomo's go-to brand of miso is from Tosa in Kochi.
Well, okay, so I'm opening.
Tomo brought a plastic tub of miso to our conversation to show me. A square container with blue and black Japanese kanji characters printed on the packaging.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's got this slightly funky, fermented, scent to it.
Inside was a thick brown paste with the consistency of smooth peanut butter.
But there's so many layers of, well, in Japan it's called umami, right? What is umami?
I don't know the translation of that one.
Yeah, it's it's that flavor, and like umami is that like kind of depth of flavor that we don't really have a word for, I guess, in English.
What is something that is umami? Like if you were eating it and you were describing that flavor or that character to someone, what has an umami kind of profile?
Like mushrooms, cheese. Cheese has a lot of umami, it's that kind of like
complexity,
depth, the thing that like lingers on your taste buds.
Have you ever like made your own miso? I've heard that like really aged old miso can be quite delicious. Like once Etsuko Ichikawa brought me some food when I was like recovering from a surgery, and she told me like, this is from a 10-year-old miso. And
wow.
It's like, it almost made me wonder, like, is there like a vintage to these things, like, vinegar or soy sauce or wine?
Yeah, that's probably true. I have no idea, So, like, I'm Japanese, but I grew up here most of my life. So I'm like what they call a 1.5 generation immigrant. I have the memory of my homeland, but like for all intents and purposes, I'm an American person, So I feel like I'm just in this kind of like limbo zone sometimes where I don't feel quite at home. Like, either here or in Japan. I don't know where my home is really, but like I got homesick for Japan.
Homesickness is one way to talk about it, but it's almost more like a longing for what's absent, which is pretty much an ongoing condition for people of the diaspora. A nostalgia or feeling for something that may have never even existed, beyond the imagination.
A lot of the knowledge I have of Japan and the culture is just from a foreigner's perspective, I think.
From a distance.
Yeah, a little bit of a distance. So it's been sort of this like backward search for my identity.
Food can be a complicated and shame-fraught experience for the kids of immigrants. What we eat pegs us instantly as one of the crowd or someone who doesn't belong. The school lunchroom is where that drama plays out.
I remember when I was a kid, my mom would package up these really traditional meals for me, like in like a recycled aluminum tin with like a soy sauce egg and like stewed chicken and daikon. It was almost like an Odin stew. And, the other kids were coming with their peanut butter sandwiches and their like disposable brown bags. And, they'd turn up their noses at what I would bring. And that was like my bento box moment as a kid of like, food shaming.
Yeah. Did you see that show, Fresh Off the Boat?
Yeah.
There's that first episode where the kid goes to the grocery store and sees the aisle of, what is it called? Lunchables. And it's all glowing. And that's resonated with me so much because I remember feeling just that lure of like the boxed lunch. And it was so exotic to me. And like, yeah, my mom was making me rice balls and stuff like that, and kids would kind of go, ew, Yeah, that's a very universal thing, I think, among Asian kids growing up. But it is funny now how much I just really wanted to eat Lunchables. It's not very good, is it? But, yeah.
The unprocessed foods that we grew up with may seem like a deep source of embarrassment, but in reality, an ingredient like miso can be incredibly versatile. It can be used in salad dressings, desserts, marinades, braises, and stews. Miso can be eaten cooked or raw. It's even made its way into fusion cuisine and non-Asian cooking. And in this way, there's a place for what was once embarrassing to become a source of pleasure, even pride. It's not unusual to stray from the foods that our bodies were most familiar with as young people, because our palates become acculturated to other tastes. But an ingredient like miso, which offers both comfort and complexity, has that power to take us back to another self through its pungence and redolence. It's worth savoring on its own, though that appreciation might come later in life. The shock of the pandemic led Tomo to seek out what was comforting, like familiar Japanese television shows and simpler flavors. During the pandemic, I also watched a lot of Midnight Diner like Tomo, but instead of recreating recipes like chicken fried rice or Japanese pork loin from the show, I was drawn to returning to the flavors of my own childhood, prepared with the tools that I had at hand. I spent a month perfecting a bowl of rice porridge made not on a gas stove, but in a slow cooker. I recreated a version of my mom's pickled garlic cucumbers using Korean gochugaru pepper flakes and tamari. I ate my homemade pickles at breakfast and dinner, just like my mom would, and thought about my mom a lot while I ate them. I also started making miso soup for breakfast. The early days of pandemic, with its long stretches of unstructured, unfilled time, gave Tomo an opportunity to explore his curiosity, and cooking was one of the only things he felt like he had the energy to do.
I was just so exhausted all the time. I just wake up and I just have no desire to play music even. And so I think I put all my creative energy into cooking.
Pre-pandemic, Tomo didn't have a strong connection to cooking. His relationship to cooking unfolded over time. When he was a kid, his mother took care of the food prep. He'd help out when she asked.
Washing the rice, that was my job.
Yeah, it's an easy thing.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
But it's also hard because you have to like keep your hand in this cold water for 5 minutes or something.
And keep rinsing.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But she did that mom thing where she's like, oh, the rice tastes so much better when you rinse it, like you do it so well. And I was like, yeah, totally. But that was just her Jedi mind tricking me into like doing chores.
Cooking takes confidence. In his 20s, Tomo found himself buying bags of frozen vegetables from Trader Joe's because it felt somehow less intimidating. Relating to ingredients in their unprocessed natural form takes some getting used to. And the pandemic made plenty of space for that kind of relating.
I remember like the first couple weeks of lockdown, the International District was kind of a ghost town. Nobody wanted to go. And people were like throwing rocks through the windows and stuff. And there's a lot of kind of fear of being Asian, But I wanted to support those businesses.
Tomo picked up ingredients from Uwajimaya and local businesses in the Chinatown International District. He made Japanese recipes that felt comforting, like omu rice and tamago yaki. As he got more adventurous, he branched out, cooking recipes from a Japanese recipe website, and he started to make things he'd never attempted before.
I talked to the fishmonger, and I asked him about mackerel. It's intimidating because it's a whole fish, and I don't know how to cut it. But he said that he would fillet it and clean it and gut it and everything for me. And so I went home and I made this miso stewed mackerel, which is like a flavor that I really love, but it's a very like fishy fish. Mm-hmm. It's, has a strong scent. I wasn't able to like cook it for other people. But now that I had my own space, I didn't mind making it really stinky, So I tried this recipe, and it's so simple, but it has so much depth of flavor.
Tomo photographed his home-cooked meals, sharing them with his other homebound friends. A distance potluck. It was a way to connect and check in on one another.
And then I kept noticing that, like, the recipes over and over would just call for those elements,
Miso, sake, mirin, and dashi are the foundational ingredients of everything in Japanese cooking.
That's kind of the secret I found. It's not that complicated, It's just like these 3 or 4 ingredients that kind of unify everything.
Tomo's efforts paid off. He was able to recreate recipes from his favorite eateries that he could no longer visit, like Miso Black Cod from Maneki, Seattle's oldest sushi restaurant, which is legendary for its obasans, grannies that host and tend bar.
It's a very slow, long process where you just gotta marinate the fish for 3 days in sake and miso and soy, sugar. The cooking itself isn't that hard, but it's just the waiting, mm-hmm. And anticipation. That felt very, very magical to be able to create that experience in my own kitchen.
Cooking takes perseverance and practice to arrive at a level of sophistication and understanding of how to fuse together different ingredients. In this way, it's not at all unlike music. Is there a relationship between cooking and creativity, cooking and songwriting?
When I first started cooking, it was just following the recipes and doing it step by step, exactly the way it was written. But then once you kind of gain those skills and understand the basics of how a song or how a dish is made, it just becomes a part of you, and then you're able to just sort of spread out and kind of add your own flavor to things,
Knowing that the character of miso is umami allows you to build depth into a dish and to ultimately improvise with it.
The harmony of those ingredients, one can't really work without the other, or when those come together, it's bigger than the sum of its parts.
When we allow ourselves to look more closely at what's familiar, we have a chance to clarify an understanding. The oden stew I was ostracized for by schoolmates is a dish that I now share and enjoy with my husband and son for its salty and bitter flavors. There are other tastes besides sweetness. Recognizing all of the qualities that make up our own sensibilities is a part of coming home.
I think before the pandemic, I was getting really caught up in just working all the time and trying to make as much money as I can and constantly playing shows and just sort of in this hamster wheel or something, And the kinds of shows I'm playing and the people I'm playing for and the kinds of songs I'm creating, I want them to resonate with my own values. When I was in my 20s and kind of starting out in music, it was dominated by very indie rock scene, which tends to be very insular and very very white, really. So I was trying to fit into that mold and trying to find my place in it. I'm envious of younger artists coming up today because they're so in touch with their roots, with their heritage and their identity, and they make that a central part of their art, which I think is really beautiful. And so that's been inspiring for me to watch, as someone who spent a lot of my youth just trying to fit in and assimilate, and I don't think I have to do that anymore, which is a really, really great feeling. I mean, I'm on the radio talking about mackerel. That's how weird is that? That never would have happened when I was a kid. So, yeah.
Check out our show notes to find out more about Tomo and his music. Next week's object is vitrified glass. Do you have a special object that you hold close? Share it with us on Instagram. Tag at KUOW and use the hashtag BlueSuitPod. The Blue Suit is produced by KUOW in Seattle. Our host, writer, and creator is me, Shin-Yi Pai. Whitney Henry Lester produced this episode. Jim Gates is our editor. Tomo Nakayama wrote our theme music. Our production team includes Michaela Giannotti, Tio Popescu, Hans Twite, Melissa Takai, and Brendan Sweeney. Special thanks to the Windrose Fund for their financial support. If you like this podcast, KUOW has a lot more great audio for you. Search KUOW in your podcast app and see what piques your interest. Thanks for listening.
At Soundside, we bring you news and conversation rooted in the Pacific Northwest. Hi, I'm Libby Denkman. I think of my job hosting Soundside as, number one, asking tough questions of powerful people, the questions you, KUOW listeners, want answered. And two, bringing you a daily slice of the fascinating, confounding, and often goofy side of life in Washington State. Join me for Soundside at noon and 8 p.m. on KUOW or anytime on the Soundside podcast.